Session of the Riverton City Council order at 7 p.m. Would Councilmember Fabian lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, looks like we've got a full council this evening, so I declare that we have a quorum. The chair would entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
Your Honor, I'd make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
Your Honor,
Yes.
should we add the speaker to this point?
Probably isn't necessary, but
Okay.
if you'd feel comfortable.
Oh, well.
I was going to suggest that we might want to swap Parks and Recreation for the, but I guess it doesn't make any difference.
Your Honor.
We're going to have people that, yes.
I was just going to say, Mr. Blumenshine's got to leave by 7:45, so.
Okay, we won't swap it then.
He's going to a wedding.
Oh, I was wondering what he was looking so sharp this evening for.
Your Honor,
Yeah.
point of order, we still need a roll call.
Okay. Probably do. Would this city clerk please conduct the roll call? I'm sorry for that, Courtney.
Present?
I'm here. Here. Here.
Here.
Here. And I'm here, I think. Okay, so with that, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Okay, agenda item number 6, Parks and Recreation Master Plan Discussion. City Administrator's report, please.
Yes, Your Honor. You had quite a packet this time, huh? 100 and some pages. You guys probably enjoyed a nice weekend, and I shouldn't make joke of that because it really is. There's some important information in there, but we tried our best to figure out what was important, what was not. But so we're talking about the Park and Recreation Master Plan, and I've included an example in your packet from a city just to give you an example of what one looks like. But it has been quite a process to get to this point of potentially creating a Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The city park has been a discussion item for some time now. It was first brought up by the Central Wyoming Skateboarding Association wanting to build a skate park. At the time, this organization wanted to build it in another location. The council really wanted to stay in City Park because of the goal to increase usage. On March 5th, 2013, the council was approached by Mr. Lee Crook that proposed a plan of what he had envisioned could be done at City Park to increase usage. Mr. Crook asked the council to establish a committee to look at City Park and develop a plan to make it successful. The city adopted resolution number 1271 to establish a City Park committee with Councilmember Jonathan Fabian as the liaison. The city advertised for this committee, and they had a few meetings, and they, at one of their meetings, they named the committee Revitalize Riverton. Mr. Craig Blumenshine was appointed chairman, and after some discussion it was determined that in order to make City Park successful, we needed to have a plan that would address all park trails and recreation to meet the needs of the entire city. Mr. Blumenshine made a presentation to the council on September 3rd, 2013, and asked the council to establish a committee to develop a master plan for parks and recreation. The council wanted to discuss it in more details before proceeding forward. I'd first like to commend Mr. Blumenshine for wanting to take on the task of developing a Parks and Recreation plan for the city. Developing a master plan in that magnitude is not a small task. Over the past several weeks, I've been reviewing several parks and recreational plans from cities all over the country. Some range from 55 pages up to 270 pages, and the process to get adopted in some instances is a long, lengthy process. The point of the discussion tonight is to discuss what the council would like to see in a plan. If the council is in support of the plan, the first step is to advertise and appoint a committee. In my eyes, it's critical to get a committee that is well-rounded and has credibility in the community. Otherwise, a plan is developed and adopted and sits on a shelf and doesn't get implemented because many people don't agree with it. The second step is to give the committee some direction as to what the council would like to see in the plan. In reviewing these different plans, almost all of them have a certain categories that they cover. The first is they usually have an introduction that includes the vision of the park and recreation system, the purpose of the plan development process of how they're going to develop it, and then the public involvement methods of how they're going to get the public involved in the process. The second one is park and recreation system needs, and these are the existing system. What do we currently have in our parks that deal with recreation and park necessities? The third one is park and recreation facilities recommendation. This is similar to the needs, but in a more realistic sense. The needs may show everything what is needed, but the recommendations include financial constraints of what we think we can actually accomplish with the budget that we have and the limited funds. And then the final one is implementation, which has a capital project list of all the ones listed, the prioritization of when they should be implemented, implementation steps, and then the funding strategies of how to pay for them. The process to get the master plan completed can be as detailed as the council would like to see it. In many of the plans, they had the following. They had a Citizens Advisory Committee, which would be similar to what we're talking about right now in developing a committee. Then there would be a Technical Advisory Committee that would be made up of engineers, city staff, and contractors that would have the knowledge to come up with some of the projects and how much they would cost. Then it would be reviewed by the Planning Commission and recommend approval. Then the City Council would adopt the plan, and then maybe a consultant to guide the process, and that's something we'll talk about in a second, the consultant. I think the success to any plan is to have input and buy-in from the citizens. That can be accomplished through community meetings, charrettes, interviews, websites, and displays. What we really haven't discussed if a consultant is necessary. To have a consultant in charge of driving this whole process and developing a plan can be very expensive, upwards to $100,000. It could be scaled back considerably and only assigned to certain tasks. The advantage of a consultant is they are skilled in creating consensus and are not directly vested in the cause. So, also included in the packet is a section from our master plan. So part of our master plan for the whole city, we actually have a section in there for parks and recreation that's fairly short. And finally, I'm attaching an article that was wrote by Mr. Blumenschein about trying to get recreation funding more equitable. That was something that was brought up in our initial discussion, and I left the other ones on the copy machine. I failed to give that to you. There's a copy that Mr. Blumenschein gave to me of based on 2006, what the funding was across the state and how much it was per student. And Fremont County is kind of near the bottom compared to some other ones like Shoshone right at the top of how many kids they actually have in their district and how much money they actually get. So in conclusion, the following questions need to be answered by the council so we can know how to proceed. First is, do you want to advertise for a Park and Recreation Master Plan Committee? That'd be the first thing. Second, do you agree with the different categories that make up the plan, as we've discussed, if that's the way you'd like to see a master plan developed? How many people or groups should be involved in the process? How much the public should be involved? Should we have a technical advisory committee? Should the Planning Commission get involved? And obviously the City Council would have to adopt that. And then the fourth is, are you interested in a consultant? Who will be the liaison from the council? We had Jonathan on the Revitalized Riverton, who would be the member that would sit on this committee to kind of guide it along from the council. And then, are you in support of the city trying to get legislation passed to make recreational funding more equitable? That would just be another question from the council to see if that's something we want to. Obviously, that's going to take some time, but if we want to try to get the ball rolling, we can try to talk to some legislators and see if that's something that they would be interested to or not. So that's my presentation. I guess in ways of the questions, those are some things we need to talk about. And I don't know if you want to go through individually these questions. We could start right at the first. And so are you interested in advertising for our Park and Recreation Committee? Is that something you're interested in having move forward on?
Okay. Council?
Your Honor.
Yes.
It would be similar to the Forest Committee.
I
And
think
that
that's
seems
what
to
we're
have worked
thinking.
well. Yeah, that has worked well for the city. I'm in favor of that.
I would think that would obviously be a good place to start, and we've kind of invited the community to this point, and I've had some people ask me about it and whatnot, but any other comments? Or?
Your Honor,
Yes. Councilman Fabian.
I guess the one tricky piece of a parks plan as compared, or a recreation plan as compared to like the streets committee that we formed is pretty much everybody has to use the streets, so pretty much everybody is already invested in that. But when you start talking about recreation, you're talking about something that, you know, my recreation may only exist on a horseback and your recreation may only exist on a skateboard, and it becomes a very, I mean, having sat on the county rec board, I've seen, you know, to one person drawing a picture as recreation, and to another person, if it doesn't have a ball, it doesn't count. And I guess the point I'd like to make is I have no problem with advertising for a committee, but I think we need to take a real close look at the names that come in, and even maybe have a chance to talk to those people about what their, you know, focus is, what their recreation is, and maybe at some point we need to form a nominating committee to go out and fill the holes that I'm sure are going to exist, and try to get a better rounded group together.
Your Honor,
Yes.
he read my mind. I failed to mention that, but I think we need to advertise to try to get people, but it's really going to take people going out and saying, we want you on the committee, because when we advertised for Revitalize Riverton, we didn't have a whole lot of response. Mr. Blumenshine, I think, was one of the few that actually called me and said that he wanted to be on there. And so, and we need to make sure we have good people on there that have credibility, that are also well-rounded, so it's not just a group of, I guess you'd almost say, zealots for recreation. So then it's a plan that's just developed by people that are only interested in recreation. You need to kind of have a variety of people on there, so you have a good plan in the end, so you look at it in the whole perspective.
Have a good diversity.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, is a question that we may want to discuss right here, right now, is rather than advertise, perhaps we just want to have a nominating committee put together and reach out in the community that way, rather than, and I certainly wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. I agree with what you're saying, and that was, I think, the reason that Stephen wrote this up, was to make sure that we did get a broad diversity of people that are interested in the community. So,
Your Honor.
yes, Councilman Baker.
Well, the thought strikes me that the council could, I guess, guide the direction of that committee if we were to establish some guidelines or I don't want to say constitution and bylaws, or that's a little formal, but nonetheless, if the council said, this is what we would like to try to accomplish, and this is how we want to go about it, but we need citizens in the community to participate in that and be part of that process, then we've kind of right up front said this is the direction we'd like to head. So that gives the committee something to work with, and maybe will attract people because they know what the real focus is. And so while we can say, something about revitalize Riverton, we're not sure exactly what that means to So a lot of people might come and be interested in it, but they have a different idea of what revitalize means. And so if we were careful about the way we put that together and spend some time thinking about that. On the other hand, maybe what we need is maybe we don't have a clear picture of that. Maybe what we need is a committee to talk it out and then bring to us what those options are. And then we could say, well, okay, here's the direction we think we should go. So
As we're discussing this and thinking about it, I'm thinking that if we go down in the list of things that you're suggesting that we need to be addressing, number 4 is, are you interested in a consultant? And if the council is interested in a consultant, then that individual probably would take that part of it on and flesh that out, and so that may be the first question that we have. If we're interested in having a consultant, then they may run with that. If we're not interested in it, then we need to back up, obviously, and pursue the line of thinking that we have right now. I went over to a meeting in Lander last night, and they were talking about thoughts on building strong towns. And they suggested that you can have top down, okay, costs more, but it's very organized, but it comes up many times with dumb ideas. Or you can have from the bottom up, which is very disorganized and chaotic, but it's the smart way to go. So I don't, that concept kind of struck me, but the presenter last night was pretty adamant about that concept. So
Your Honor.
yes, Councilman Guard.
I think that's a good approach, and my answer to that, and has been along the way, is that lots of times, and Mr. Weaver alluded to that, we go out and get a consultant, and they're well trained, and they know what they're doing. They're schooled in the approach, but as a result, we get a bigger city idea than what we really have entailed, or what monies we have to spend. And so I would propose to you that we would be better off, and I don't like ruling by committee, because it does a couple things. When they bring their, we see this in the appeals board and other places, when they bring their concerns, and after they've thought it through, occasionally we take a different course. And so they feel as though they weren't listened to or weren't appreciated. And so I think what Councilman Fabion's suggesting is that we would maybe have ourselves a spot there that I think the responsibility comes back to this table to vote on the dollars that we spend and the ultimate responsibilities here. But I think we really do need to listen to a council of Rivertonites that have been here and experienced the parks and experienced what they would like to see the growth of Riverton and the direction of it is. I think we have really good citizens. If they won't volunteer, I bet they would listen to an appointment from the mayor. And if mayor doesn't want to do it, we could set up a committee on the council to go out and ask people's willingness to sit on that committee, and bring those names back, and maybe even an interview situation, because we really don't have the dollars to spend, even if we come up with some wonderful ideas. And so I think they have to be somewhat realistic in their approach and what we have money to spend. And if we're going to spend any dollars on a consultant, I would much rather spend those on new tennis courts, give the money to the skate park people. Whatever it takes, $100,000 would go a long ways to hit the skate park arrangement. And so it would go a long ways to replace tennis courts. And so I just would suggest before we step off that curb that we would be better off to go find people in service in Riverton that would assist and be willing to do that at a no-cost basis. Thank you.
Your Honor.
Yes, Councilman Fabian.
I almost think that we might get to a better committee more quickly if we almost started out with a few people who are very well latched into the infrastructure of recreation, maybe looking at some of the people involved with our rec, maybe obviously some of the school district people. Mr. Blumenstein would be a great, resource, and maybe trying to get some people who are very much already involved in recreation in Riverton to rack their brains for the people that they see as being, valuable to a committee like this, and then going and approaching those people to see if they would be willing to serve in that capacity. I think we would get a lot further, a lot faster than maybe just advertising and seeing who happens to put their name in.
Okay. Any other comments?
Your Honor,
Yes.
it
Councilman Baker.
seems to me that we do have kind of a beginning, at least, for a recreation plan in the city master plan, and so it could be that we could charge the committee with looking at that particular plan. I mean, if a master plan for parks has to be 50 pages long, then this one falls short of that criteria. But it's always the devil that's in the details, and that's what's missing in the city's master plan is the detail. Exactly where is this new park going to be? Exactly where? How are we going to pay for it? And all those details. That's absent. And so maybe the goal here would be to have a committee that would take what we already have in place, the Chapter 7 of the city's master plan, and go through that and address each of those paragraphs in the plan and say this is how we think we could meet that. Because that's what the consultants have suggested based on formulas that they typically work with. And so, they're thinking if the city adds 3,000 people in the next 20 years, this is what the demand is going to be. And the idea behind planning is that we should be not just trying to meet our needs today, but our needs in the future as well.
Any other comments? Councilman Heiser? Being involved with recreation as heavily as you are, when
I'm racking my brain here trying to. I guess it depends on. I would hate to get bogged down with, I guess, recreation in general. If we're going to go after the parks, then let's go after the parks, and we as a council need to be very specific as to that's what we're doing, because if you're not going to give a committee the type of guidance that they need, things can get out of control very quickly. Not in the sense that they're not wanting to do good things, but we're thinking they're going to come back with one thing without telling them what we want them to come back with, and then they're going to come back with something different. And you run into what Councilman Gard alluded to, where they say, well, you know what, I spent 3 months on that committee, and the council, we presented it to them, and they didn't do anything. And so I think the main thing for us is we need to be very, very clear about the direction that we would like the committee to proceed in, rather than just leaving the door open. I guess that was kind of my frustration in the beginning of the master planning process. And I know that it's all a part of the process, but I think sometimes we leave things way too open, and to get to the heart of the matter a little more quickly, I think it's on us as the council to say, you know what, here's the direction that we'd like to proceed in, and we'd like some advisement from interested community members, be they appointed, whether they turn in applications, whatever the case may be. But I don't think you can have them just dangling out there saying, well, here, you go figure it out, because we don't want to. And that's going to be the point where you're going to turn a lot of people off. So that's the thing that I keep replaying in my mind is we need to come up with something that's, I guess, a lot more direct than what we have thus far. Granted, we're just starting, but I think you're going to be a lot more successful if you start with the end goal and work from the back, rather than starting with some wide open plan and then just seeing where we come out at the end. If we start with that end goal in mind, it's usually a little easier to get there. So,
Your Honor,
Yes.
Eric, would
Councilman
that be like targeting a certain park? Say, let's start with City Park and not worry about the rest?
absolutely.
Or let's start with the overall of what we want in our parks, and then,
That's one of the main things I'm having a problem with is we said park, and then we said, well, it has to be all the parks. Well, I don't really think that it does. Who's to say that we can't start with, especially the park that we're trying to take back, and move from there? I think too often we throw way too many things out there, and then we just forget about them because it was too much too soon. So
I would put too much on the committee too.
Right.
They're not focused on that.
absolutely.
I agree.
It sounds like from what you're describing that we may be focusing on a master plan for the city park versus a global master plan for the entire city and all of the parks and anything that has to do with recreation and yada, yada, yada.
And it certainly could mirror, if we started with City Park, the other parks could or maybe would not mirror them. But I just, that's my main concern is we're going to throw so many things at this committee and they're not really going to have, we talked about, yes, there'll be people with their own opinions and want to go their own directions, but at the same time, if you don't give them any kind of guidance, then you can't really be frustrated when they come back to you with 50 different ideas. So,
Your Honor,
Yes.
in my
Councilman Gardner.
experience right here in Riverton, I lived on Ryan Park for 15, 20 years. And the city spent a lot of money to put berms and trees in Ryan Park. And then without any input from any of the neighbors, I was never once asked. Somehow we decided to take the berms out at a great cost to the city, take the trees out, and turn it into a soccer field. That was done, and soccer uses it heavily for 6 weeks in the spring and in the fall. And then there's nothing else in that park. There's not a swing, there's not a tree. There is a bathroom that the city added. And so I think it's important that we have a committee that looks at the overall usefulness of year-round activity in that facility. And I think it even takes a point at some time to run a survey around the community of what they would like to see. It wouldn't be a bad idea to put out a flyer to all of the 6 blocks around City Park, and what would they like to see City Park? What needs do they have? And if they have small children, do they need playgrounds or whatever that is, instead of just have a city park sit there and be mowed for 9 months of the year waiting for soccer to return. We don't have a backstop down there. We don't have anything. There's just nothing down there except soccer nets. And so, and I think that was just done by a group of individuals that wanted soccer to have a location. And so I think it would be, we have a tree board that meets, and people can bring ideas to that tree board and it stays intact. And maybe this committee needs to stay intact and function the same way, that when somebody wants to do something in the park, they start with that committee and say, we'd like to have a dance. And that goes through that committee and then back to us. And maybe they could even have the charge of trying to get activities into the park. Concerts, whatever they could do into those facilities, so that somebody was actively engaged in trying to make usage of those parks for the multitude and not just a specific use of, this is just going to be a soccer location. Thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes, Councilman Christensen.
I agree with what Councilman Heiser was talking about, Councilman Garden, everyone. The one thing that they talked about is, I think, if we're going to focus on one area, if that's what we're going to lead to, gathering all that data, what do we already have? So we don't duplicate at some of these parks. I think that's really important. I don't know if it would be these gentlemen, or see what we already have and see what we may need prior to focusing wherever that would be. Because I think there are a lot of good things out there. I don't know all of them, but if we took a look at that first, it'd be important. Then we could focus a little bit more.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I don't know, we need to have Craig, since he's got to leave at 7:45, I just want to make sure he had an opportunity
Would
to
you like to address the council?
comment or
Craig and could you state your name for the record, Craig?
Craig Blumenshine. I'm a Riverton citizen, recreation, highly interested. I think that in the process of thinking about what to do at City Park, it would be an error just to focus, quite frankly, just on City Park. I do think there are things that may or may not happen in the park that you might wonder in the context of our community if something could be in a different park, or a city park just one place. And I think that to include Sunset Park and Ryan Park and the other parks in the discussion would not be overbearing for a committee in charge of planning for a park. The example I used in our last meeting was tennis courts. There are tennis courts in City Park. Perhaps there are collaboration opportunities with School District 25 to build tennis courts elsewhere, rather than just looking narrowly at City Park. That's why I think that looking at all parks, and I even threw in rec trails because I'm concerned that we're not going to upkeep those like we should, our recreational pathways. I suggested to Mr. Weaver that it would be absolutely imperative to inventory and assess what we have in all of our parks. Again, I don't think it makes sense to look at an inventory and an assessment of City Park blind to the other things that we have in Ryan Park or in Sunset Park or elsewhere. We need to look at things in total to be able to make decisions on the singular, being City Park. Have an idea of what might work someday in Sunset Park or in Teeter Park or in Aspen Park or in City Park. It would be a mistake just to have tunnel vision just on that one park. That said, I think it's wise to limit the discussion for this particular group to parks and potentially trails. There are many, many other components of recreation. You guys obviously deal with our recreation in that contract, and recreation issues certainly in the community. Relative to this group, my thought presenting and coming before you last time is let's take a look at our parks, see where we want them to be, assess what we have, and please, as I encourage Mr. Weaver to convey to you, and I think that he did, work very, very hard with the legislature in partnership with the school district and college to make recreation funding more equitable. He's going to give you the spreadsheet that I gave to him. I'm sure you'll get that soon. It really takes a look at not just in the scope of Fremont County, but throughout the state of Wyoming. What Gillette gets when they assess 2/3 of a mill, what we get when we assess the full mill. There has to be a way to have recreation uniformly funded in the state. It's important to me, just like it is to someone who lives in Gillette or Sheridan. I can tell you that. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Mayor, that I think that a committee could work with the city and inventory and assess what we have in all of our parks. I think the committee could be charged with getting public input and doing a good part of that planning on, if perceive that new tennis courts are needed, promulgate maybe some relationships with the school district and assist in that regard, to determine if there's more playground equipment needed somewhere in a park, or a park is underutilized, to maybe figure out ways, working again in context of all the parks, to make sure that our parks are available and wanting to be utilized on a yearly basis, because like I said last time, you guys dump a lot of money into our parks already. It's expensive. Our taxpayers are paying for that. Are we getting the biggest bang for even that buck? The answer is unequivocally, I don't think we are. We don't know what we're going to do next year or the year after that with our parks. So that's why I'm hoping that you'll encourage the community to join with you and plan what we want our parks and trails to look like.
Craig, is there any questions for Mr. Blumenshine?
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on how this committee could be built? I mean,
Sure.
have you thought about that?
I think it's a partnership of what you were talking about earlier. I think you owe it to the community to advertise and ask. And then I think you owe it to the community to use your best judgment and encourage and make the call to people that you think would be good members of the committee. Whether that's charging a subcommittee to do some nominating for you or not, I think that's wise. I think the moment that you just make it that exclusive little group that the committee nominates perhaps might cause us some trouble, but if we open it up to everyone, and some of those names are duplicated, hey, that's great. Would have applied to be on it anyway. I hope that we can just convey that parks are a quality of life issue for all of us, whether we use them or not. They are. There are lots of people, I think, in the community that thought about it just a little bit would help this process along. But to answer your question, I think you ought to do both. Bang your heads together for people that you think might be interested, and open it up, and then spend one of these meetings interviewing folks. If you're lucky enough to have that many people.
Okay. Any other questions? Do you have any comments regarding a consultant?
I enclosed with you a plan from Kanab, Utah. Is that pronounced correctly? Eric, you've been there. And I believe that a committee of good folks here could do a large majority of that. I do think there would need to be some partnerships and discussions with experts in developing cost estimates, whether that be with your city engineer or with other interested engineers in the community, and perhaps there might be some expense required for some very limited in scope consulting questions. I know as well as you do how expensive they are. I'm concerned that, like Councilman Gard said, if we have $100,000 that we're blessed to spend on parks, let's get it in a fixed asset rather than some consultant's pocket. So, I'll commit to you that I would do my best to be able to duplicate information contained in that plan, and I think with the right folks and the right drive that I believe the committee could do a majority of it. There are some limited times when we might need some outside help.
Okay.
We come to you for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the wedding this evening. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so it sounds like what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're probably not interested in pursuing the consultant approach. Is that? Okay. There's one of your answers, Stephen.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate Craig's comments as well regarding the invitation to the public. I think that we would be remiss if we didn't, open it up to the public, and I guess what I'm hearing, and once again, correct me if I'm not correct, that we should go ahead and advertise to the community to see what citizens are interested in serving on such a committee, and then going through whatever process in order to, if we should be fortunate enough to have a large group volunteer. I don't think that will be the case, but if we do, then we can go through and do the weeding down process. So,
Your Honor,
yes.
just one question, something that Councilman Gard mentioned, and I was just wondering, with the conversation, if we wanted to move in the direction of a more permanent board rather than a committee like our tree board, and have a Parks and Rec board for the city that, could be an annual appointment kind of thing, that they could assess what we have, they could go through the master plan like Councilman Baker suggested, and we could task them with, focusing on City Park or focusing on different areas. But, I didn't know if we wanted to move in that direction, but when Councilman Gard mentioned that, I thought that might be a more permanent solution for long-term kind of oversight and care of our parks and trails.
I think in as much as right now we're just looking at putting together the plan for the community, and once that plan is in place, then I think that it would be appropriate to continue, an organization to try to keep that moving forward. But I wouldn't disagree with what you're saying. I think a more permanent board like that would certainly make sense. Any other comments?
Your Honor.
Yes, Councilman Fabian.
To go back to Councilman Heiser's idea of, keeping it specific, I guess I resonate closer with what Mr. Blumenshine said, that you can be specific and say, we don't want you to look at Little League baseball teams. We want you to look at our parks and our trails and leave it at that for now and get that figured out. I don't think that's too big. And I guess I would just agree with the idea that it's, it just doesn't always make sense to look at this one place in absence of having also considered this other one, because, you end up missing opportunities to collaborate that make something that would be maybe more useful by having two things close to each other, even if it used to live in this park, but now it's over here. You miss those types of connections if you don't look at everything. So I do think that, you can be specific as to what you want them to look at, but I would agree. I think it would be too fine of a point to say just this park. Now, that having been said, once we have a plan, we could say, okay, well, we want to spend our money in just this park first, and then maybe move on from there. But in the planning phase, it just seems too narrow of a view to take it to that level.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Your Honor, I certainly won't disagree with that. I guess the point I was getting to, and I can already see it happening, here we're talking about parks and recreation. What we're really talking about, though, is our parks. Parks and recreation is such a massive, massive topic that we need to be very specific. It's fine if you want to consider the other parks, that's all good and well, but what you're going to run into if you don't solidly define what you want that committee doing is death by choice. They're going to have 500 different options there because, well, is that what this park should have or this park? Or what about, well, this is recreation and so is this. That's the problem. It's not a bad idea to consider what could go in each park, but without some sort of area that we're heading to or bullseye on a target, it's very tough. It's very easy to speak about things in general, but when it comes down to decision making, you need to be more narrow. That's just the way things are, and it certainly doesn't mean that we only do City Park, but I've seen it happen way too many times where you say, well, you just go figure this out. The problem is you haven't told them what to figure out and how to figure it out. We need to give direction, and I think that's exactly what Stephen's looking for tonight is, yeah, we like the idea, but is it parks and trails? Is it just parks? Is it parks and recreation, which is now morphed into a huge issue? That's my main concern. I think this committee, if it's just parks, I'm not even sure that you want to go down the road of trails because I think that's a whole nother beast. Then yeah, if you told that committee this is it, this is what you're going to focus on, here's the things that we'd like you to keep in mind, certainly with the right group of people you could probably make that happen. But to just throw them on there and say, hey, if you're interested in parks and recreation, bring in your application. I think you're going to get people that are disappointed because you're not focusing on recreation per se, you're focusing more on parks. That's all I was, and I certainly don't disagree with Craig. I think that's a good point, and we just need to make sure we're very clear with that committee. So,
I think Councilman Baker may have touched on that when he was suggesting that in our master plan right now, we do have a section dealing with the parks and whatnot, and it may be that if we could use that as the core element to start with and then just flesh out in the areas that they're talking about, we might come up with what we're looking for in our community without getting so bogged down in one
Yeah, Your Honor, and I was going to say, he touched on it a little bit. I think really the charge would be that they look at our existing, what we have, and then say, what do we need to add to that or change or modify, and then they come up with an implementation. And that's their charge, really, is to inventory what we have, see what we need in the future or what we need to add to, and then how we can implement and maybe some funding
Do
strategies.
the
in
community
that.
inventory and see
Yeah.
what the citizens feel the needs are. And so I think there would be plenty of work in there for
We could-
whoever wants to.
And I
act
agree,
like-
the recreation maybe should be taken out, because when I look through those plans, recreation is a massive, it is a lot different. I mean, recreation in some ways is part of parks, but then you're talking about rec centers and other things that are not really park related.
Would we be stepping on toes as well, in as much as we're contracting with Central Wyoming College to provide recreation for the city now, and suggesting by this action that we don't feel they're doing a good job? And I don't think that's the case, but would they interpret that way?
Well, they may, Your Honor, or you'd have to make sure they're a part of the process. So they would sit as a board member on there.
Your Honor.
Yes, Councilman Gardner.
I bring up my experience in Ryan Park only because I felt there was no input by a group to decide what was happening at Ryan Park. And for those of us that have been here long enough, Ryan Park was designed to be 2 soccer fields with berms and trees and shade, so that people could come and watch. And at a great expense. I don't know I do know who the push was that pushed it through, but without any input from many, we ended up with just a flat piece of ground and spent a lot of money to take it apart from what we already built. And so I think there ought to be a way to come in and voice your opinion, try to influence the way you'd like to see parks handled. I do agree with Eric. I think that it's a really tough job, and we ought to task it. And we ought to say, we want a committee to look at City Park, and we want City Park to be reused. We want to know what it's going to take to get people back in that park. And I think one of the real limiting things is going to be funding. If we come up with I want a water slide that's 45 feet tall, I want a lot of things. I can't afford to, and I think that's going to draw us back in. The tennis courts, not too long ago, were told were $380,000 to replace our tennis courts. Where are we going to come up with that money? And so I do think we need to do, as Eric said, and target the parks, but we can work our way through the parks also. We can, when we're done with City Park, that group can move on to whatever the next park that needs help is. And we have a lot of wonderful parks in Riverton. That could be Aspen Park, that has been neglected for years and just sits there, and maybe we go down there and jazz that park up just a little bit. So it has, so a kid could actually go over there and play on the swings and wait for his mom to come pick him up. I know those days have passed. They can hardly get away from their teachers to walk down the street. So, but I think there's ways to do that. And I think if we don't target them well, I think Eric's right. It'll just be a really confusing time for them, because they'll be fielding questions on every park instead of trying to spend their time on how to improve a park. I do agree with that. And I think it is important that it's a broad enough committee that it doesn't get hijacked by special interest.
Okay, any other comments?
I'm looking at table 7 in the master plan Parks and Rec natural resources section.
What page
And,
is that?
22.
Yeah, 9 of
Page
122. Yeah, page 9 of 122.
Page 9 on your actual.
Not.
So
I'm there.
that says.
If you look at that table and look at 4.1a, I mean, actually 4.1, I could see potentially falling, each of those things may be falling under a committee, but 4.1a, it seems to me like it would be a pretty nice, relatively pointed thing to task a committee to say, you know, we would like you to develop a plan for park development and maintenance and a maintenance schedule for what we already have, so that what we've already put the money into doesn't fall apart, and then, you know, work on how we're going to expand from that point. And actually some of the, you know, 4.1B, C, D, those all need to be handled at some point along the way, or we're going to continue to never have adequate park space in this city. You know, things like establishing guidelines for neighborhood parks, and making sure that, you know, there's requirements on contractors and stuff for set-asides, and things like that are what's going to make the long-term thing work. But that's too big to have a committee look at. But I think 4.1A would be an okay place to start from where I'm looking at it.
Just listening to the conversation and whatnot, I agree that we need to be clear in what we expect out of the committee. I don't think there's any question about that. But I don't know how you could do a master plan for parks without looking at all of the parks. You know, I just don't see how that could be a possibility if you're looking at a master plan, you know, and we're narrowing it down. But
Your Honor, maybe that's where Lars's comment comes in, that they use the already established criteria in the master plan, and this is the basis of our master plan to park usage in the city, and then come down to the fact that we're going to, a starting point is what the council points them at to start at. Maybe City Park isn't what the whole council wants, but I think that's a good place to start. It's a center point.
well, it's obviously the crown jewel of our community as far as parks are concerned. But when you look at 4.1E, coordinate with school district to convert former school sites into parks when possible, we just tore up a beautiful little park down there at Lincoln School, and it had all the playground equipment and everything out there, and they just jerked it out of the ground. I don't know where it went.
Landfill.
It went where?
Landfill.
Yeah, so there you are. So I
I think you're right about that, Mayor, and I don't think that has to be an all-encompassing thing. I think a voice of reason right there would have said, if we come down and pick that playground equipment up, could we have it? They probably would have said, yeah. You know, even the McDonald playland went in the landfill. And if we had a committee that was concerned about that and would approach those and said, you know, we could take that play stuff down and get it into Aspen Park, would that be all right? And so I think that committee, once formed, would be tasked with this, and their eyes would be open to where recreation was happening. And I think it would be a real blessing to do that. But if we just go willy-nilly at it and try to fix everything at once, we're going to be disappointed. And even, you know, when we look at corporate sponsors, if we're attacking corporate sponsors for Little League and all of the things that we do, we might be smart to try to focus that down to, if we're going to go out and ask the casino to be a corporate sponsor, let's channel that to where we want that help. And if that's in the parks, and then instead of them getting touched constantly for 15 different projects, we can go out and say, you know, we just want you to sponsor the work that's being done in the park, and we'll give you the billboard space, we'll give you whatever it takes, but we'll make your funds go the farthest in one spot at a time instead of shotgun the approach.
Okay, any other comments? You've been awfully quiet over there, Councilman Smith. No comments.
Nothing additional.
Okay. Any other comments?
Your Honor, if we look at the master plan, it seems like it's prioritized. In other words, you know, our first priority should be to maintain quality parks, okay, at a current service level. And then the next section is expand what we have. for growth. And so if you look at the, the charts that they provided for us, they're suggesting there that, by 2030, we should be looking at 17 acres of parks, whereas now we have 7.3. See? And that's in the area that's north of Main Street and west of Federal. So, I mean, they already put some time and growth direction for the community.
Your Honor, I hate to be the economic guy here. It seems like I'm always throwing water on the fire, but if we all stop and think, most every park that I know of in Riverton was donated ground, not purchased ground. And so when the difference between purchased ground and donated ground is once again like the consultant or putting real structure in. And so, and that's the hard part for me for a master plan, that it says we should be looking for 17 acres. We have 7. If Craig was correct and we could get funding, I think that's what leads us into this next category, is funding. You could actually go out and say, we're going to buy all of the old hospital ground, which we already bought, and instead of putting anything on it, we're going to make a park to the east side of town, and we would have funds to do that. And that's probably something we really should have thought of and looked at hard, because it was a nice location, easy access on main thoroughfares. It would have made a nice park to that side, but it's not too many blocks from the park we already have. And so, acquiring ground is probably going to happen to us a lot like Mr. Majors donating property from time to time. And we have to be ready for that, and we can't be locked into the fact that, gosh, we got to, that's where our landfills are today. We've got to get $2 million, $20 million shelved up because we're going to have to move off this site and create a new landfill. And so when it comes to the legislature, I'm not a great socialist. Anybody can tell that along the way. But it would be nice if we got equal money like Gillette. Mike just came back from Gillette. They got 3 indoor tennis courts, 3 indoor basketball courts, an upper track, a lower track, a swimming pool with slides, and the works in Gillette. When do you think that's going to hit here? It's going to be a while. And so, and maybe we can equalize that funding. It worries me when we do that, because we end up with the school funding that we have now. But we put all the money together and we put it out per student. And it probably isn't, I would much rather go back to the school boards and have local control back to this committee, where if you really don't like what I choose to do, you can get me unelected. But you have your hands on that. The community has their hands on that. And if I suggest we build the $9.2 million swimming pool like Powell did, they have a really nice swimming pool. We have a really nice water system. And they both cost the same. And so It's relative, and I don't want to say that we can't ever have that rec center. You know, with the commerce that's coming to town, if we got 4,200 wells, uranium mines, Job Corps, there may be a point in our position where we would have the tax base to go look at that harder and make something happen. And so I think this is a place that committee could step right in and move off onto that if we had a bonanza someday, or if rec fund was more evenly distributed throughout the state. But what makes that work for Gillette, why they can get by on a 2/3 mill levy, is that shovel never stops digging in Gillette. It just keeps digging 24 hours a day in 3 locations. And so I really think that most of our restraints are going to be financial. Even though we want to have a skate park, Lander, did the mayor put in cost $240,000 for the skate park in Lander? Isn't that kind of the
Not
number?
quite, but close.
And so if we could target all of our corporate sponsors and everybody to stay together till we got that paid for and then move off to tennis courts, we would accomplish a lot more. I think that's what Eric's trying to point out, that if we eat that elephant in small bites, we can accomplish something instead of just try to cover the whole system of parks. And if you're not careful, there's complaints from Ryan Park that I want to swing sweat in Ryan Park. It has to wait its time, but there is an avenue to go and to petition to get something put in Ryan Park. Let's plant a tree, so when I'm watching soccer, I don't have to be in the blazing sun. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, so related to the funding issue, is that, I don't really have a sense of if people are interested in trying to get legislation or run from it.
Well, I think it's a fairness, I'm speaking just for myself, but it seems to me like it's a fairness issue that needs to be settled, leveled out within the state. But I think objectively, trying to push some things legislatively is a little bit of a challenge, and especially when you're planning on taking money away from other communities.
I know.
And I support it 100%. In a perfect world, each student would be getting the same amount of recreation dollars and yada yada yada. But that's not the way that it works. That doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it. I think we probably should. But I think that they're two entirely separate issues that I think we need to be moving forward with a parks plan, okay, for our community, looking towards the future holistically, and the 17 acres and yada yada yada, and taking advantage of what we have and looking at what we need and whatnot. If you want to, I don't envision that process as looking at our city park and this is what we need right now in City Park, whether it's skate park or whatever, okay, and using this as a springboard to justify and rationalize spending city dollars on it. That's not the way I'm looking at it at all. I'm looking at it as an overall look at what our community needs as far as parks are concerned. And it's just two separate ways of looking at it. They're very intertwined, but if we just want to look at our city park and how to look at the skate park side of the equation now, freestanding, and let the rest of the parks go to heck, why, that's certainly something that we can do. But I kind of envision it more as fleshing out the existing master plan that we have for the city, and as Councilman Baker's pointed out, the park side of that and the recreation side of that is pretty sparse right now, and but
Your Honor.
one isn't exclusive of the other. Yes.
Two quick thoughts. The first one that comes to mind is, Councilman Guard's point that a lot of the parkland
That's a
that we
reality.
have is donated that's a point well taken, and I guess that's one thing that I would see this council needing to maybe look at moving forward on, independent of this committee, is to set some guidelines for future development, much in the same way that we say, you know, if you're going to put a business park there, you're going to have a road that goes through this part of it because that's our plan. Having a similar process for ensuring that we do, you know, maybe we aren't always going to have generous people willing to donate land, but we do as a council have the right to say these are the standards by which you will build in this area. And you know, we do that for our citizens. We do that so that in the end we end up with, you know, adequate park space for them. So that's the first point. And I guess the second point that comes to mind is I think when the rubber hits the road, I completely agree with Councilman Guard and Heiser that we've got to say, yeah, we're going to do this thing first and this thing second and this thing third. But in our, I mean, we do the same thing in our water plan, but that doesn't mean that we don't know what the next thing we're going to do is. And we have the plan for the next, I don't know how long it goes, but it's a while looking forward. And we know that, you know, once we get that tank on the hill, then the next thing is to build this water line loop. And then after that, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And, you know, the parks can be the same way. We can have it laid out and say, okay, well, we're going to build this basketball court, and then we're going to fix that tennis court, and then we're going to go chip seal the pathway, and then we're going to, you know, that I have no problem with targeting, but I still think you got to know what it is you're targeting. So, thank you.
Thank you. I don't disagree at all with what Councilman Guard is saying, that our parks are donated, you know, land and whatnot. But I think that we could probably be doing more as a community. I think of the college has the foundation program up there, and they're out soliciting and trying to figure out how to get people to donate too. I don't think we're doing that at all. You know, there's just people like Mr. Majors that were willing to donate to the county, and perhaps we could have a part of that for the city, that if you've got a spare piece of ground and it's not doing anything and you want to get a tax write-off, why, it'd sure make a beautiful little park for us. And that type of solicitation. So I think there's a lot of different facets to this whole concept, and I think we can get bogged down trying to chase each one of the rabbits down its hole and see where it goes, and then disagreeing on the minutia there. But overall, I think we,
Your Honor,
yes,
large developers, and the city does this already, requires playground areas in a large development. And unfortunately, we're currently in a small development mode. And until we get back to that, and somebody brings in let's say Ida Inc. nails the ground behind Walmart, we could work with them and get them to donate a large piece of ground into a master plan of land development there. And that would be a group that would be very willing to do that. And they could set aside 17 acres behind Walmart. There's a ton of acres there that we could really use. And we need to be aware of that, even to protect the modelers. Maybe the modelers have to move off of Federal's frontage and back to acres deeper in that piece of ground. And so I think there's lots of ways to do that. And I think this group and committee that we're talking about is a good idea. It's a way to do it. I think it maybe needs to have some appointed members so that you can get out there and target people that are doers and get things done. And it certainly does need to be open to those people in the community that want to be part of the program. That's how we get people active and off of their couch and come help. And maybe they're the next big help. So we need to encourage that. So I think it's a wonderful discussion, and we have real opportunity to make this work with people in the room that are already willing to do the work.
okay. Any other comments? Do we have any direction for you, Stephen? What are you
Yeah, I
still
think
needing?
I've got enough.
Okay. Okay. Well, it is an interesting subject, and it's very important to the community, and so I agree that it's been a good discussion. I've enjoyed it. Okay, there's no action then can be taken, I guess, in work session. Okay, the next issue is temporary merchant license discussion. City Administrator's report, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Sandy is going to walk us through this. You have quite a bit of correspondence that we've put through from other communities. I don't know, we have 5 or 6 communities in there about door-to-door sales, and so Sandy is going to walk us through that, and she's going to make it more concise for you, so you don't have, for some of you that didn't wander through every 122 pages, she's going to help you out. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We presented an awful lot of information, so I'm going to attempt to just more or less give you a synopsis. This was brought up almost exactly 2 years ago. The chief did bring it up at that point in time, and we decided not to do anything then. I think in light of the complaints that we've received more from citizens more recently about door-to-door people being overly aggressive and taking advantage of the elderly, I think that's the reason that we're bringing this up again. There's also safety concerns regarding the salespeople entering residences, such as the incident that was in Lander last week. So I think, you know, in our mind, we need to do something about this. In the Community Development Department, I think we've received complaints almost every time we've had door-to-door salesmen in this town when a group comes to town in some manner. Our current city ordinances don't provide for easy remedies in these situations. At this time, when a sales company does come to town to inquire about permits for door-to-door sales, which are required in most other municipalities, they're almost always directed to the Community Development Department for some reason. And so what we started doing, because of all the complaints, we utilized our contractor registration ordinance to try to at least get some information that could be utilized in case that there were problems. But per that municipal code, you know, door-to-door solicitation is not really listed under contractors. But we felt that was one way to at least get a little bit of information in case we had problems. And we would usually give lists of people to the police department at that time to at least try to mitigate that. And we still, this last time especially, had a lot of problems and had a lot of complaints and people coming in. We thought it was better to have some kind of knowledge of the salespeople. With the contractor registration and licenses that we do right now for the taxi cabs, the tree trimmers, daycares, home occupations, we actually regulate quite a few businesses in town, and yet we don't regulate any of the door-to-door salesmen that are almost always from out of town. And the chief feels that we should at the very least, we need names and dates of birth, permanent residence, contact information, so we could find out if there is, when there is a problem, we could at least address that and hold these people accountable. We did do a survey of several different municipalities, and we revealed that there's a diverse stance regarding this issue. Some of the municipalities strictly prohibit all commercial door-to-door sales, and while others don't have any regulation at all. One municipality actually the solicitation license costs $130 a year. Many require permits for licenses for solicitors or itinerant merchants specifically, or as a general business license. We don't have business licensing in the city, and yet some of the municipalities just use their general business license to regulate the solicitors at the same time. And the fees start generally about $30 and go right on up. Obviously, we need some direction. What I thought I would do is give just a little bit of some background real quick. A lot of the municipalities, how this started was actually quite a few years ago. In 1931, Green River, Wyoming actually enacted an ordinance that basically did not allow any door-to-door sales. And that ordinance actually went nationwide. And it was looked at, and several companies came up and tried to find it unconstitutional, but actually the courts held it up for quite a few years until more recently. What they did is the constitutionality of the same ordinance was sustained on the ground that frequent ringing of doorbells of private residences by itinerant vendors and solicitors was in fact a nuisance to the residents. So I thought that was really pretty interesting. And I did notice in one of the other ordinances that is actually how they address solicitors as a nuisance, and they're not allowed because they're a nuisance, and that's how they address those. And they actually, it's kind of a misdemeanor. One of the ones that I looked at quite a bit was the Green River ordinance, and partly because they're the ones that started it originally. And in the recent past, in March actually of this year, they approved an update to their ordinance, because previously they allowed no solicitors within the city limits of Green River. Well, there's been some judgments against some other municipalities, and then they did have a sales organization that started to do some legal proceedings against Rollins, or against Green River, and they decided at that time they needed to probably update their ordinance to stay out of the legal battles, and so that's what they ended up doing. An ordinance will still allow door-to-door salesmen to peddle their wares, and residents do have a choice in allowing sales calls and are required to post one of two signs if they do not want commercial salesmen approaching their doorstep. So that's what they ended up doing. Residents can allow nonprofit solicitation at their homes by posting just strictly a no commercial solicitation sign on their property. And this would still allow Girl Scouts, church organizations, but it would prohibit the professional sales from going door to door. Residents can also post a general no solicitation sign, which would prohibit all salesmen and nonprofit representatives from approaching. If a person does not post a sign, the residence is open for all forms of solicitation. However, there are rules that people have to follow. And this is one thing that we have none. We have no rules here in the city. We have no rules that give us any guidance or allow us to do anything if we see solicitors. I mean, people come in and they complain, and we say, really? No regulation. There is a trespass law that the chief has brought up, but the person has to be very emphatic and say, I want you to leave my property now. You're trespassing. But they have to be very emphatic and tell them that, or they're not going to leave, because they're salesmen and most of them are pretty aggressive. When Green River did pass this, one of the things that we had discussed was how are we going to get the information out on what we're doing, and nobody pays any attention. They have just a little two-sided flyer that I thought was really very concise and explained everything. Explained what commercial solicitation was, what non-commercial solicitation was. Are the solicitors required to do a permit? Also, how can you ban it? I mean, it just explains everything on it, and I thought it was really good. In Green River, at the same time, they also had an outlet where citizens could pick up a no solicitor stickers, which I assume you could put on a piece of wood or whatever, and hang on your house. So they were actually giving those away for people to put on their houses. They have a sign size code, the same that we do, and it's like 1 square foot. that you can have on a residential house, but that's plenty big for a no solicitor sign. So, you know, most of them, they just, in their case, they just said the signs have to be prominent. And then they have rules and regulations in place then that if someone comes to their door and tries to solicit, there's still regulation, and they can call the police because there is a law in place, and then there are penalties and those types of things that can be up to $750 fine. So that's another thing we don't have. I mean, there's nothing we can really do if people go to someone's home at this point in time. Okay, I was just going to go through a few of them just really quick. Like, I know when you look at the Green River solicitation permit, it looked huge. Basically, it's 3 pages. And even that can be a front and a back if you really need it to. What Green River has done is just made sections to put all this information in, where some of the other municipalities have just listed in a 1-page thing all the things that you have to put in there. So then you'd have to take another piece of paper and write all those things down or make all those. So this is just really concise. The rest of it is really the regulations, if you wanted to include those and that type of thing. So it is really, you know, really concise. Now there's things in there you may not want. This one requires a photo identification. Maybe you don't want that. But it does ask for the specific information that the chief had asked about, and so that would be on this one. If you just decided to go to an ordinance. Some of the other ones, I was going to say this one also addresses the same thing that we were concerned about with the non-commercial solicitation. It does not eliminate sales by Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or anything. One of the other municipalities actually even says any person under 16 is not required to pay. Now, it looked to me like they required a permit, but they didn't require them to pay a fee. So, I mean, things like that can be done. We can change that. Let's see. And so a lot of this stuff from Green River is the ordinance and the rules and regulations. There are violations and penalties. City of Casper, they actually utilize a 4-page application, and it's actually just their general business license form that they use to fill out on theirs. And they have some of the similar rules and regulations that Green River has. They call it an unsolicited salesman's license. And again, they have these lists of things that needs to go on the applications, and then you just have to make sure that you fill those things out or put them in with the application. And they put actually their itinerant merchants and their unsolicited salesmen together. That's something I'd like to talk about in just a little bit too. City of Cheyenne has temporary or transient merchant for door-to-door solicitation. Their license fee is $100 per 14-day period. And they also they've got a 2-page application. And again, the rules and regulations similar. Let's see, City of Laramie. Let's see. They have more, I didn't find that they required an application. They just happen to have some rules and regulations. It's in with their regular business licenses, and they have specific rules and regulations for those. City of Douglas, a permit and a license is required, and they must obtain those. I think this was the one. They have some different fees and terms. They have a fee of $150 for selling for a period of 1 calendar year, and $15 for each person that's out there selling. Then they have a $75 fee for a company for 90 days, plus a $15 paid by each representative. That's going to be there. And then they require all these other things too: permanent home address, brief description, nature of business, vehicles that are used, licenses of vehicles, those types of things. Let's see. City of Evanston have rules and regulations for solicitors also. And and they have the exemptions from the ordinances, which I know that you were concerned about, and then they have their application, which again is their regular business license. City of Cody, somebody said they really liked that one because it was real simple. It's a one-page thing. You know why? You know what it says on it? Door-to-door selling is prohibited. So, you know, it's simple, it's just prohibited. But again, then you're gonna end up with some legal things and that type of thing. What the city of Cody actually has, this is a transient merchant licensing. That's what I'd like to have here in conjunction with our door-to-door sales, either in conjunction or in addition to, because we have issues about that, and we've looked at several of those, and I'm not too sure this isn't really a good one for the transient merchant license. But the only way it addresses door-to-door salesmen is says they can't be here. Anyway, so somewhere along the line, we need some guidance, that you want to leave it just like it is, and, you know, no regulation whatsoever. We'll just, when they come in, we'll say nothing's required, and you can go about your business just however you want. We won't do contractor registration on them or anything. We just will tell them. And at one point in time, we were doing that. Until we were getting so many complaints, we decided we needed to try to do something. You then could just go ahead and eliminate and prohibit all commercial door-to-door sales, just the same way that Cody says that it is in there. And I'm not too sure that's a great idea. You could eliminate or prohibit the commercial door-to-door sales if no solicitors or no commercial solicitor signs are placed on the residential doors. I believe you're going to need some kind of rules or regulations in order to do that, so that stands up. You can require commercial door-to-door sales to have the city permit with minimum fees and listing all the authorized solicitors, and use some kind of rules and regulations, and then creating those rules or regulations. If you'd like to consider an ordinance with some regulation, staff really would suggest beginning with another municipality's ordinance and permits such as the Green River, and adjust to meet your desires or requirements. They've already gone through the whole thing. You know, it'd be much simpler if we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Green River, of course, like I said, has recently adopted their ordinance, and they've done it for 81 years, so they've probably had quite a bit of experience with it. So we can add any exemptions and remove any regulation that you feel is too strict.
Okay, thank you, Sandy, very well done. In the interest of our very patient member of the audience that has sat through a lot of minutia here this evening, it's my understanding that you have some comments that you would like to make, Becky, on this particular issue, if you would, please. State your name for the record, please.
Barker. Give you a little bit of history about how I become knowledgeable about soliciting door-to-door sales. I was 19 years old. Born and raised here in Riverton. I found an ad in our local newspaper, the Riverton Ranger, that stated $500 sign-on bonus. No experience needed. 18 to 25 girls and guys to travel the USA. Awesome job for a 19-year-old. Get to be paid and travel all over the United States. Sounded amazing. I was told that I would be traveling 18 hours away from home, away from everybody that you know, anything close to what you know. After being asked several questions about my athletic ability and my appearance, I had gotten the job. Nothing about my sales experience. It wasn't needed. I was pretty flattered, actually. After obtaining the job, asking more questions about what my position would be, I was told I would be going to pre-organize sales to local businesses in different cities across the United States. On arrival to the job, that's not what I was doing. I was dropped off in the middle of a neighborhood and asked to go door to door, cold call sales. when I brought this up to my boss, my new manager, I was told, you're 18 hours away from home, so you're going to make this work, or you're going to walk home. These are things that pushes you to want to sell more. You are forced to make things work. Most of the salespeople that will come to your doors are under some type of a pressure. We may not know. I've seen several different types of it. Do you want a place to sleep for the night? Do you want money for food? There were so many pressures put on each sales agent. They would go to any extent for more sales. A lot of people would use scare tactics, putting their foot in the door to keep somebody from closing it until you purchased something. That happened on several occasions. Another thing is, the more that I got to know the people that I worked with, the majority of them had some type of a warrant out for their arrest. Whether it be for drugs, assault, other misdemeanors. It was easy for them to go from city to city. They would never get caught. But once they did, they were gone. They went to jail. It's just a matter of waiting until they get caught. Not knowing who's coming to your door. Our city, not in our community, not knowing what type of people we're allowing into our homes or in our yards is very risky. There were several occasions where being put under those pressures, you might do something that you would not normally do to ensure that you're still safe. And I saw that happen to so many agents all across the United States. It's not just in one place. It's not just in the cities. It's getting bigger and it's getting worse, and it's definitely coming to Riverton more and more frequently. So I think that having an ordinance that allows us to know who's knocking on our doors, what company they are from, what vehicles they are driving, is extremely imperative. Not just like for the safety of our families, but a lot of fraud as well. Taking in orders and cash and checks and credit cards and taking them all across the United States, you don't know whether you're getting your product or not. Anybody could show you a copy of a Better Business Bureau report. It does not matter when it comes to getting your product that you're purchasing from somebody that you don't know. So I would really strongly urge Riverton to put ordinances together to prevent anybody from any damages or being a victim. I don't know, is there any questions that?
Your Honor, Becky, the ordinances we were talking about, do the companies you worked for, do they mean anything to those companies? Like the no solicitation and?
It works as a deterrent. Because if you have several people on your sales crew, or magazine crew, or soap crew, or whatever sales crew it might be, who have warrants out for their arrest, and they are aware of the fact that there are ordinances, they are less likely to take on a risk of getting caught. Why would you want to get caught in a city where they have an ordinance?
Sure.
Doesn't mean that you're going to catch everybody. They'll still go door to door.
Do the companies research what cities have ordinances and how they enforce them, or?
Always.
No.
As as I became a manager in my company, I started researching it more. Just because of the fact that I was becoming more aware of who I was working with. But not necessarily. There were several managers out there who really didn't care because they knew they would never get caught. But when something bad did happen, it was either pay the consequence or take off to the next city. If you can catch those things before they move on to the next place and it gets worse, why would you not?
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Becky? It's not a career field that you would recommend for our youth then?
Body.
Okay.
Great learning experience.
Okay.
Learning experience.
We really appreciate your coming this evening, and I can tell from your describing it that it brings old memories back up and whatnot, so.
It does. They're pretty tragic things. There's a lot that are pretty unexplainable and torturesome. So
And
I think Riverton should definitely consider ordinance, finding out who these people are that are coming to our homes.
and ordinances with some teeth in them so that we can hold these people accountable if they are abusing their privilege.
Yes,
Sounds
definitely.
like. Okay.
And not with a small, for the permits or for even something that is going to be worth them being.
Your Honor, one other question. If you were in a city that you did have to have a permit or license, what are the fees like across the country?
Different.
Okay.
There were several places that had, a $20 fee for your whole sales crew, but they only asked for the company name. In my experience, that wasn't a very wise thing to do. I mean, if you have a $20 fee for one company and you have 17 sales agents out there and know anything about them, it does no good. If there were other places that had a requirement of, we need a photo ID of each person who's going door to door, and then on top of that, we are going to create your own ID from our city that you must carry and wear around your neck or in our city. That one seemed more logical. Had a record of who was going, where they were going. There were other cities that had no knock lists. Once you obtained the permit, you were given a list of homes that you were not to knock on their doors. And I think that was for the protection of a lot of people in their community from either past experiences or just for their own privacy.
Did that work?
Yes,
And
yes. I think it helped immensely for the salesperson along with the people in the community. As a salesperson, you're not wasting your time going to doors that you're not supposed to knock on. You'll get in trouble. People in the community, it was a peace of mind knowing that I'm on the no-knock list and not show up here.
sure. Thanks,
Were
Becky.
there groups of citizens that you would target, say retirement areas or?
There were not, as individuals, once you have a sales team and you realize each person's potential, you're going to put them in an area where you know they will do well. If you have somebody that's not dressing as nicely or maybe missing a tooth or two, they're going to put them in a lower class neighborhood. If you have somebody that dresses really nice and has a great appearance and a great speech to give to somebody at their door, they're going to put them in a very high class. So it's really an art of who they are targeting. Along with ads in local newspapers. A lot of large cities don't run these types of employment ads. They're not allowed. Riverton specifically was targeted as a smaller community where they know that people graduating, what else is there to do in Riverton? You could the college, you could start your workforce, you could, but really, for a young adult graduating high school, there's an easy out. And they target, lower income types of communities rather than large cities. Way for people to get out of their small towns.
Okay.
Thank you, Becky.
Any questions? Yes, Councilman Fabian.
Was signage effective? The no soliciting signs?
No. Nope, not at all. A lot of sales managers will tell you the only reason why there is this no soliciting sign is probably because one or the other, husband or wife, put it up so the opposite would quit purchasing things. 50 chance you're going to catch one or the other. So, no, they were not effective. A lot of people would even forget that they had their own signs on their door. It was something just overlooked a lot of times.
From a legal standpoint, though, for enforcement, it's my understanding that we have to have that, or citizens have to have that in order to, if someone abuses it. Is that correct, Chief?
Your Honor, really, if a person today was to put up a no soliciting sign and a person came to their door to sell anyway, the only recourse is to ask them to leave. It's no different than them just asking them to leave anyway. So really,
But if we have an ordinance in place, then you can take legal action against them if you have a no solicitation and they're asked to leave. So it does serve some
From a legal
benefit.
standpoint, it does,
Okay.
as long as the person who has the no soliciting sign follows through.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, you're busy, you're in the middle of doing something, and then you're interrupted by your door, and then really you just do anything to get rid of the person that you don't really want there in the first place.
No, I don't need another magazine. Okay. Okay. If there's no other questions, well, thank you, Becky. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, what's the will of the council regarding this particular issue? Comments?
Your Honor,
Yes. Councilman Smith.
after reading through all the different city ordinances, I'm glad I don't live in Green River, for one. I think that can go right to the shredder. I think for the issues we're dealing with here in Riverton, that's like taking a jackhammer to a small problem, attacking a nail into the wall. So I really think we need to look at something that's a lot more streamlined, a lot more simple in trying to implement. I still like the length of the city of Cody's licensing and some of their code. I think you could adopt that to include door-to-door sales. But I really like, number one on their general information, and that's on page 121. It is unlawful for any temporary or transient merchant, and you could add or door-to-door sales or however to include that, so you put that in the code, that is not a Fremont County resident to engage in or do or transact any business within the city without having first obtained a license from the city of Riverton. If you did that, you don't have to have all the definitions that you have in the Green River ordinance. You don't have to put all the exemptions in for your nonprofit groups, your church groups, your campaigning, anything like that, because you're just targeting those people that don't live in Fremont County, that are coming to our city that we don't know, and you're trying to get some information about who those people are who are going door to door in our city. And so you streamline a lot of those definitions and a lot of those things. I would be more than comfortable of having the chief work on with Sandy and Stephen to develop a form for the information he needs in order to have the information on the out-of-town people that are in our community, trying to do door-to-door business. But I really think if we do something, it needs to be really streamlined. And the cost to a business should be the administrative cost, $30 or whatever it takes to fill out the forms, but we get all the information we need, because really we're talking about those people that don't live here. We don't want to target, if Mammoth Music wanted to take flyers out door to door to advertise their grand opening, we don't want to catch them with this ordinance. Or Domino's Pizza, or, you know, the young kid trying to sell something. We're not targeting the people that live in Riverton, Wyoming. We're trying to find out who it is that's coming into our community from outside, so we have some information on them, and then we need to have a paragraph or two for information. If you're knocking on doors that have a no solicitation sign, there will be a penalty up to the 750 or whatever we can impose, so we provide some protections for the citizens. But I think we need to not include a lot of red tape and not list 7 pages of new ordinance to put into our city ordinance to deal with a small problem, but let's have a small solution that targets specifically what the type of people we're looking at. So, thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes, Councilman Fabian.
I would wholeheartedly echo what Councilman Smith just said. I love the exemption for residents of our county. It takes care of, you know, so many groups that we don't want to target with this ordinance. And I just feel like, while the specific language in every line may not be perfect, I think the city of Cody did it right. And if we can then, you know, it says, you know, full disclosure of the city laws governing merchant license appears in ordinance Title 3, Chapter 5. You know, we could do a similar thing that points to where we say, you know, if you knock on one that has a no solicitation sign, that's $750 a pop, or however that works out. But I completely agree.
Okay, I guess I'm just thinking in that discussion there, if you're dealing with people that have marginal ethics to start with, why would they get a permit if they knew that they didn't have one if they lived in Fremont County? And so they come to your door and you say, are you from Fremont County? Yeah, I live in Pavilion. How are you going to recognize that, I mean, for everyone that's honest, you know, and you ask, no, I'm from Detroit. Well, why don't you have a permit? You know, you can understand that reasoning, but I'm getting from Becky that these are not people that have any scruples about suggesting that telling a little white lie. And so I think we need to build a system that's tight enough to provide that. I don't disagree that we need to protect the Mammoth Music from putting out his flyers. I don't think that's at issue either, but I can envision that we're going to be out enforcing that kind of a problem. I can envision our neighbors calling and saying, hey, you know, Bernard was here giving a thing, and darn it, take care of it. So at any rate, is there any other comments anyone would like?
Your Honor?
Yes, Councilman Fabian.
I guess in response to that, I would rather cast this net and let the police respond to complaints. And I mean, somebody can tell me they're from Fremont County, but I have a feeling when the chief shows up and talks to that individual, if they're not from Fremont County, that's going to become quite obvious really fast. And if they were rude and aggressive to the point that they went past my non-solicitation sign, and I want to file a complaint with the city at that point, because again, this is going to be something that we're going to respond to on a complaint basis, I have no doubt, then, you know, it's up to our officers to show up. And I guess if the person's from Fremont County, then they're from Fremont County, you know. But I don't think that those are the people we have the problem with, because, you know, they have to live and work here with us, so for them to act that way wouldn't bode well for their long-term happiness.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Councilman Christensen.
I think with this, whatever application we take, I think they have to show a license or some ID, wouldn't they? To prove where they're from. I mean, if you get one from New York and it's, you know, I think a line about showing it some form of ID would be, on this one, it just shows social security and birth date. I don't know, some proof of residence would be a good way to go. And I think most of the other ones I read were a license. I guess my whole point in this, bringing this up, was that the people need to be protected, because I think it is a bigger problem than I think it's a big problem, or I do. People have been approaching me lately about it, and I think it is a huge problem. It's public safety. I just think we need a way for whoever, these people, to come in, register, show proof of ID where they're from, so we could go back on them if we get a bad product or don't get any product, and at least know where they are. I think one thing I didn't ask, well, Becky hinted at it, that a lot of these folks are felons. I mean, I think we should know something about them. I just want people to be somewhat safe and allow these people that want a job to do the job and go door to door if they choose to do that for a living, but keep our citizens safe. That's pure and simple. It's the chief has to have a way to monitor this. So, however we do that is fine with me.
Your Honor.
Yes, Councilman Heiser.
First off, I would like to add that if we could have some language in here that says the chief has to do it, I think that'd be terrific. Now, all joking aside, I do. It is an important issue. I'm with the majority here. Streamlining is fine. I really don't think you're going to catch that many people that are going to try and say they're from Fremont County, because they're going to have to know that before they come in. So a lot of these folks don't check with City Hall when they come in. They just go door to door, kind of like what Becky spoke about. So I think that's an easy way to catch those folks. The one thing that I would bring up, and it sparked my interest when it was brought up to me, so I'll throw it out there and we can chat about it if you'd like. And Becky brought it up too, and that's the idea of a no-knock list. The couple of constituents that I heard from were very irritated about the fact that they were the ones that had to put up a sign. Said, this is my house, why should I have to be the one that says, you, if you're trying to sell, don't get to come up to my house? Rather, if I want you to come and try and sell me something, then I'll put up the sign. Was kind of how it was put to me. And so I said, well, well, certainly I can throw that out and see about it. I didn't know how to approach it until tonight with the no-knock idea, and that's certainly a list that could be, I would think, maintained pretty easily. And I suppose if it is a long list, then that's I do agree, though, that especially as a homeowner or even someone that's renting, that it's kind of backwards. It's backwards that you have to tell the solicitors that they are not to bother you, rather than essentially inviting them in. I can't argue that point to a constituent. I can't say, yeah, well, that's just the way it is, because
Have them have a sign that says solicitors welcome.
Right. I mean, it's that's what they were saying. Is they said, and this was two separate people. They were not people that came up in a group. So that's why I'm thinking, this is not. And as I thought about it more, I thought, why would I want to? And I was thinking in my head those big outrageous orange signs that say no soliciting. Like a garage sale sign. And I was actually looking tonight. They do have nice signs that you can put up next to your doorbell that say no soliciting or no commercial soliciting. But it's just another thought, I guess, just to put it out there. Is there's a little bit of concern from the couple of folks that I talked to of the onus being on them rather than the other way around. So, like I said, I think we need to do something, and I'm with whatever the majority would like to do. I will gladly follow suit. So, thank you.
One question I would have, Becky, with our social media being what it is now, and do marketers talk back and forth to each other if one's selling vacuum cleaners and the other's selling cleaning supplies and somebody else is selling magazines, are they in communication or, so they know what's a fertile area to go into and come up to the,
Somewhat. Some managers are going to know other managers of other companies, but I think the competition is still between them. None of these managers will ever be honest about how well they did in one area. And if they did very well somewhere, they don't want somebody else soliciting that area. They want to come back in 6 months or a year
I see.
later.
Okay, so it's kind of proprietary.
It's very territorial, to put that lightly. Very territorial.
Okay.
One thing that I did think of that I did not mention was also, I know a lot of places in Florida, they are solicited on a daily basis, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day by several different sales agents. They have a neighborhood watch system.
Shoot you.
That might be something very difficult to do in a smaller community. But knowing all of your neighbors, knowing their children, knowing who is in our community is something that a lot of people think don't always, we take it for granted being here. So a neighborhood watch system would be another thing to look at. I have an elderly gentleman across the street from me who sees everything. And I'm very thankful for it. But not everybody has that luxury. But there are systems that way also.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor,
Councilman Christensen.
I have one other question. So if we pass an ordinance, no knock list, whatever, do we need to post a sign at the entrance of town, a register or whatever, that there is some ordinance in place, or is that, I don't know.
Your Honor, I know of towns that have done that. Windsor is one that was just, Windsor, Colorado actually has a sign that says no solicitors. But it's the same thing. People still have to post that on their individual residences, according to them.
Your Honor,
Yes, Councilman Gard.
as I read through all of the applications, and Eric hit on that, everyone has to get their choice of a sign and post that sign. And I do realize that there's certain segments of our society that needs protection from that. There's never been a salesman that has come to my door yet that I couldn't get rid of. As I get older, that may be a different arrangement. And so I don't want to be unfeeling for that. But if everyone in town ran out tomorrow like the Green River ordinance where they're going to give away signs, you pick out which sign you want, commercial or no soliciting, and we'll get a whole bunch of signs put up around town. And even a sign on the city limits of Riverton that is a negative note in my thought that we aren't welcoming at that point. The people that have approached Eric is they really don't want a nasty sign posted on their property that says no soliciting, because they're living there and they're mowing their yard and taking care of things, and they're trying to have a really good place that's welcoming, yet they're not necessarily wanting that vinyl siding salesman's approach. And so the thing that bothers me about all of these is it requires the citizens to go out and do something else. Buy the sign, post the sign in a prominent location, even the no-knock list. You've got to come down, call, say, add my name to the no-knock list. We all know how well that worked on the telephone system. We've all dialed the number that says take me off the 1-800 numbers, and you still get a lot of calls. And so I don't know how to make it work. Chief, do you have time to chase down every vinyl siding salesman that I call you with? I call you occasionally about somebody
in the park doing something I'd rather they're not doing. Do you have time to chase down my vinyl siding salesman?
You know, we do, Councilman. I think that if any citizen who's going to call us and ask for our help, we send an officer to them. Right? We have to prioritize that based on call load or call volume. But if you want an officer, you're going to get an officer in this community. What I'm more concerned about, frankly, from a crime prevention standpoint, is not whether you can run a salesman off from your house, but who's going to run them off when they come to your house and you're not home and your neighbors are not home. So now we've taken kids. I think Becky was very eloquent in talking about this issue that the people who are doing these sales that we're worried about are not from here. They're from 18 hours away. And so they have no roots to the community. We have no idea who they are. And we look at a crime like burglary, which is an anonymous crime. People get away with it because of the anonymity of breaking into your house when nobody can see them. And we further that by giving them a good reason to be in your neighborhood, you know, that's legitimate, and we have no way of knowing who they are. The very fact that they have to come and give their name and their birth date and some identifying information can serve as a deterrent to them feeling anonymous when they're in your neighborhood. No one answers the door, they go around back, nobody answers the door, they check the neighbors, nobody's around. Why not help themselves? We're not having rashes of those in this community, but in the community that I worked previously, it was outrageous, the amount of residential burglaries that were occurring because of door-to-door salesmen.
And see, my suggestion would be very simply that we get the information, and I suppose if somebody's coming to town to mislead us, they're going to know within a short period of time that they can bring a false ID in, tell you that I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, I'm really from Montana. If I choose to deceive, I can certainly do that, but at least we have some kind of record of who's coming through the door, who's out there, and approaching those things. But my problem with that is I would really like to do that Stossel trick that if every law we wrote, we had to take one off for every one we put on. And I think it would be helpful at times because we just go around stacking these ordinances on and we really don't have a problem per se. And we're gonna write another ordinance to put more work on our police system, put more work on our city staff. And what are we going to stop is my question. We still have to post the soliciting signs, whichever sign we choose. We still have to go out and put that negative notation on the fact that Riverton doesn't welcome door-to-door salesmen. And then my other complaint is that uninformed citizens blow up on others knocking on their door because they've heard this conversation that we're going to enact some kind of law to keep them from knocking on their door. And they don't go out and make any of the positive steps to keep somebody off their doorstep. And we just add to the frustration of that process. And unless they get involved, get on the no-knock list, get the signs posted that are required of them in prominent places. And once again, just like Eric's pointing out, all the onus is on the homeowner. All the responsibility is back on the homeowner to drive away this individual. And if we do write an ordinance, I think it's a great idea to know who's in town. I don't have a problem with that. And if we can get good IDs, picture IDs, and stuff that we trust, then we can actually run that down to the ground and see if there's a rash of burglaries and if any of these people are connected. I think that's good work. But Green River's fee, Cody's fee is $300. Now Becky said that she liked the high fee and thought that helped, but $300 seems extremely high to me. And am I incorrect of that?
Your Honor, that is not for door-to-door salesmen.
That's
Cody
for the
does not
transient.
allow door-to-door salesmen.
Right. Well,
Transient.
but the transient merchants have to pay a $300 fine per year. Correct.
That's correct, and
And
that's
I think the other thing is when we raise that so high that no one wants to come to town and invest $300 in it, we do the same thing. We drive away people that might come to town to sell product. So, if our effort is to drive people away from town, this is a good ordinance to write. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
Yes, Councilman Fabian.
I guess The one question that I would have for Councilman Guard is, I am trying to think through what the benefit to our community of having outside people come in to sell their wares is.
Well, for we merchants, and you should be with us, if somebody throws their back out in town, I think he's going to look for a chiropractor. If he's packing a bunch of suitcases full of vacuums and his back goes out, he's going to need your service. If he's eating like most of us do, morning, noon, and night, he's buying groceries. If he's sleeping like most of us do, he's buying a motel room. And I just this morning heard that shutting down Yellowstone is costing the state of Wyoming $3 million a day, not in fees in Yellowstone, but transient volume to the state of Wyoming. And so if our efforts really to spur growth, which I think it is, we should be welcoming. Now, if this is a criminal element, like Becky's telling us it is, then I'm wrong. There's no need to go out and solicit felons to come to town. But I have not been approached at my house by very few salesmen, very few. One in the house I live in now. The paperboy comes, I wish the paperboy would come a little bit more often. But only one salesman, and I like the product that he sold me. And so I really don't see the problem. But the mayor tells me I'm imposing, so, maybe I chase people away. And so they don't bother me. But what I'm trying to say is it's an attitude, a pleasantness attitude. And I don't have a problem with it. If we need to go out and protect people, I just think they need to know that their responsibility is to get on the list and to post the signs. And then the police chief can come out and do his business. But unless they do that, they're not going to have the success that the ordinance could afford them. Thank you.
Your Honor, I would.
Councilman Fabian.
I guess I see what you're saying, that yes, they use services in this town. I guess the point I was trying to make is, if truly most of these people are criminal types, then even if they're selling me a product they like, and even if they would come and get the chiropractic adjustment, I, for one, as a citizen of this town, would prefer they not. If I don't want that individual in my town, around my children, around my neighbors, around my friends. And so I guess I do draw a line. Not everybody who walks into this town is a good influence on it, regardless of how much money they may have in their pocket.
Okay. A couple things have been brought up. First of all, regarding the no-knock list, I think that would be a lot more involved for our staff than what we're giving it credibility. And our staff is worked, I think, to the maximum right now, trying to keep up with water breaks and all of the other stuff. I don't know how Courtney would feel about having a no-knock list and try to keep track of it, but I think that would be just terribly onerous. People moving from place to place and updating the list, and I can just see that becoming a nightmare. But the other thing is, I think that we're having this discussion this evening because it is a problem in our community. We're not debating that issue. Okay, it is a problem in our community, and I think the chief has alluded to it. I certainly have felt that. I've talked to a number of people that feel that way, and I just don't see the downside of us putting laws in place so that if someone does abuse them, that the chief then has something to hang his teeth in. The way it is now, we don't have anything. And so I think it's worthwhile for us to, and I don't disagree, it shouldn't be a 50-page document, for God's sakes, with miles of boilerplate or anything like that. I don't subscribe to the thought that anyone that comes to the door soliciting is a criminal element. I don't believe that. I think there's a lot of very nice young people out there that are trying to make a few bucks or whatever, and so we need to be sensitive to that. But it just seems to me like it would be smart for us to have something on the records, on the books, that knows who that we're dealing with in the community, and then if problems do present themselves, well, we can take whatever action that we can in the court of law. But not having anything out there, I'm not sure that I envision or interpret the way that you do, Councilman Gard. When I drive into a community and I see no solicitation or something, I see it as a community that wants to protect itself. Okay, and we've got people in town that have Main Street businesses that have a lot of money invested in them, that are selling vacuum cleaners or whatever. And so for us to allow, with no strings attached, to come into our community and sell a product in competition with them, that bothers me, quite frankly, a little bit. So I don't know, with that tirade, why, I guess, I guess I'm personally leaning that we go with C or D, requiring commercial door-to-door sales to have a city permit with minimal fees and listing authorized solicitors. I could live with either that one or D if there's other people here that feel differently. Why?
Your Honor,
Yes.
I like the
Christensen.
suggestion, I don't recall who made it, but have the chief and Sandy kind of sit down and look at something that would really benefit them
Yes.
and make it easy for the city staff, and then maybe bring it back, and, yeah,
Okay.
it has some teeth in it.
It's after 9 o'clock. Do we want to call this wrap? And is there enough direction there for you,
Yeah.
Mr. Weaver? Okay, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn the council work session.
Move to adjourn.
Second.